The ancient Greeks considered the Olympic Games to be the most important of all cultural events. For the athletes who competed, it was a chance to represent their hometown, pay respect to the king of the gods, and win fame and fortune beyond their wildest dreams. So, today we're going to take a look at what it was like to be an ancient Olympian. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, leave a comment and let us know what other parts of ancient history you would like to hear about. Okay, time to grab that ancient Wheaties box and let the games begin. The Olympic Games date all the way back to 776 BCE. Probably. That date was provided to us by Aristotle, and although there's no absolute proof of its correctness, there's evidence suggesting some form of the games might actually go as far back as the 9th or 10th century BCE. Modern historians and archaeologists generally accept the 776 date. Also, Aristotle wouldn't get that date wrong. He had Olympic posters all over his bedroom. Held at a rural sanctuary in Olympia, which was located in the western part of the Peloponnese Peninsula, the Games were part of a religious festival that honored Zeus, the big cheese of the Greek pantheon. No one knows exactly what went down at the first Olympic Games, but several literary traditions hold that the only event was a single 600-foot race, known as the Stadion Race. That sounds less of an Olympic event and more of a dare between 5 drunk friends in a parking lot. That race was won by a cook from the nearby city of Elis, named Corybos. Good job, buddy. It must have been a big hit with the crowd, because the first 13 Olympic festivals consisted of just this single event. They eventually added additional, more exciting competitions, and the Games continued to be held in Olympia every 4 years between August 6th and September 19th for roughly the next 12 centuries. While the modern Olympic Games are open to everyone, the ancient Olympic Games were only open to men. Free Greek men, to be more specific. But this policy still drew a pretty eclectic mix of participants, including everything from soldiers to shepherds to philosophers. Even Alexander I, a future king of Macedonia, was allowed to participate. Despite the fact that women were forbidden from competing in the Games, a few, like Kiniska of Sparta, still managed to eke out some victories by owning the stable of horses who won chariot races. This was possible because the rules were sort of like the rules of the Kentucky Derby, where the winner of the race is considered to be the horse and its owner, rather than the jockey. Which seems fair. It's not like the jockey's running anywhere. Other women would follow in her footsteps. And by the 1st century CE, women were even starting to compete directly against men in foot races. When it came to the ancient Olympics, wealthy citizens had a hefty advantage. Although a public training facility called the Gymnasio did emerge around the 6th century BCE, the playing field was still heavily slanted toward the rich. Wealthy athletes spent their lives eating better foods, had more time to train, and could hire better trainers. It takes a lot of time and money to look like an Olympic statue. Moreover, participating in the Olympics could be expensive. Olympia wasn't easy to reach, so travel could be pricey. Athletes also had to arrive a month early to train and would have no income throughout the whole training and competition period unless they participated in local competitions. Poor athletes could always try to find a sponsor, like their hometown, a king or wealthy individual, or Gatorade, probably. But it's unclear how common these arrangements were. The ancient Olympians were competing in front of a crowd, and that crowd was typically buzzing with excitement. Spectators came from the Greek mainland, as well as the islands Ionia and Magna Graecia. They lived in makeshift campsites, buzzing with food vendors, poets, musicians, craftsmen, and philosophers. So, kind of like Burning Man, especially with all the togas. No one knows exactly how many people showed up to watch the Games, but we do know the stadium held approximately 45,000. Interestingly, married women were strictly forbidden from watching. In fact, the penalty for a married woman caught on the grounds of the Olympic sanctuary during the festival was death. The modern Olympics maintains that level of severity for anyone caught sharing videos of the Games on social media. To kick off the festivities, the athletes entered a temple and stood before a statue of Zeus so grand it was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. A sliced piece of boar flesh would then be offered to them, upon which they would have to swear an oath promising to obey the rules of the Games. You pledge allegiance to a pork chop, essentially. Then, on the third day, 100 bulls would be marched up to the great altar of Zeus and offered up to the gods. The daily diet of an ancient Greek consisted of things like bread or corn porridge served with vegetables, dried figs, cheese, or olives. Since meat was rarely eaten, the chief source of protein was fish. So we guess they just threw those 100 bulls away. Olympic athletes, who are typically wealthy, tended to eat more meat than the average Greek because they needed the extra protein to facilitate muscle growth. Beyond eating habits, athletes were also expected to show great discipline in how they lived their lives, especially when it came to things like sexual activity. Having sex before competition was considered a major no-no. Why? Well, athletes believed having sex prior to competing made them weaker. One famous athlete named Clitomachos refused to even discuss sex before competing and is alleged to have averted his eyes when he saw two dogs getting it on. It's unclear how witnessing that would have affected his performance in the javelin toss, but you take any advantage you can get. Athletes at the ancient Olympics were trained by a herotribis, who taught wrestling holds, or a gymnastis, who knew the best diets, how to develop muscle, and how much exercise the athlete should be getting. Many athletes also had a sort of masseuse called an elaitis, whose job was to rub the athlete down with oil and massage them before and after workouts. Ancient Olympic athletes also consumed things that they believed would enhance their performance, specifically testicles. The performance-enhancing drug of the ancient world was testicles. And for those who didn't have any testicles to eat, they could always opt for a ground-up mix of donkey hooves and rose petals. Failing that, they could just eat live bees. I do see how that would make you run faster. You've probably noticed that modern Olympians wear clothes. Ancient Olympians, on the other hand, tended to compete in the buff while slathered in olive oil. This was probably about freedom of movement, but it presumably also made them very shiny and allowed them to blind their opponents. How the tradition of naked sports got started in ancient Greece is a matter of debate. Whatever the case, many of the athletes would scrape the olive oil off their bodies after competing and sell it to fans. Nice. Gonna turn around and sell that on Epsilon Bay. There was one exception to the whole nude competition thing: charioteers. You see, every so often one of them would wind up being dragged by their horses, so they were allowed to wear some protective gear over their more tender areas. The Olympics may have started out as a single 600-foot race, but more events were added over time. For example, the competition came to feature equestrian events like chariot and horse racing. Chariot racing was the most popular sport in ancient Greece, and the way they did it was as much like a demolition derby as it was a race. Up to 40 chariots could race at a time, and crashes were extremely common. Sort of like NASCAR, only presumably louder, because of all the horses. After the chariot races, usually came more straightforward horse racing, which sounds like it should have been less dangerous, but it wasn't. The chariot usually left the track pretty torn up, and ancient Greek jockeys had no saddle or spurs, so they were prone to getting thrown. Combat sports were also big in the ancient games, including wrestling, boxing, and the pankration, a type of no-holds-barred wrestling that was essentially like ancient UFC, only, in the nude. Those who proved themselves in these types of Olympic combat sports became celebrities and could go on to win fortunes in smaller competitions. And for those athletes who could do it all, there was the pentathlon, which included 5 events: discus, javelin, long jump, running, and wrestling. But the award for most unlikely event has to go to the competition for trumpeters and heralds that was added in 396 BCE. This genuine event that we absolutely did not make up was held on the first day of the games, and the winners were those whose sound carried the furthest. Your prize for victory was the honor of announcing the winners of the other competitions on the final day of the games, and probably some type of fancy trumpet. Being a champion at the modern Olympic Games comes with a lot of perks. Winners might get lucrative endorsement deals, become a correspondent for a sports network, or maybe even land an appearance on Dancing with the Stars. But the ancient world had its own version of prestige. Victorious athletes of the ancient Olympics were permitted to erect statues of themselves inside the sanctuary of Zeus in commemoration of their victory. A champion who won 3 times could even set up a specially commissioned portrait statue, which, let us assure you, was not cheap. In fact, a statue like that could cost up to 10 times the average yearly wage. These statues were typically made from bronze or marble, but the bases for several did. Sort of like your Little League trophies. That little baseball guy on the top always broke off. Winners also received crowns of wild olive and were showered with leaves and flowers. This form of celebration, known as the filovola, was the inspiration for the modern practice of throwing of confetti and ticker tape at victory celebrations. According to some histories, winners would become the subject of poems and songs, be sent home in a chariot, and receive a pile of money. They would also be excused from ever having to pay taxes again, which is a perk modern Olympians probably wish was still a thing. Most people associate the Olympics with the Greeks, but the truth is they were still played even under Roman rule. But the Romans had a decidedly different attitude toward the whole thing. They saw the primary value of the Olympics as a form of entertainment for the crowd, whereas the Greeks put the emphasis on the importance of the competition itself. In other words, the Romans were into the sizzle, but the Greeks were into the steak. But in the end, even the entertainment value wasn't enough. Emperor Theodosius, or possibly his son, did away with the Olympic Games around 400 CE. It is believed that Theodosius associated the games with the pagan gods, so he shut them down in an effort to help push Christianity as the religion of the Roman Empire. The Olympics would not return until 1896. So what do you think? Could you have made it as an Olympian in the ancient world? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.